Thank you very much, Jean-Luc Paquet, for these encouraging words. And now I suggest that we go to session 1. Actually, when we were thinking about organizing this conference, which is dedicated to the 20 years of the research infrastructures, we thought that it would be very interesting to have a historical view on the research infrastructures, on the origins of the research infrastructures. That's why I welcome to the stage now Stéphane van Damme, the historian, and he is a professor at the Paris Science Lettres University, and he will give us this historical view on research infrastructures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before starting, I would like to express my gratitude to the conveners of this conference and for making room for history of science and technology, which is not obviously usual. So we know that Europe was built on the basis of a philosophy of integration that focused on material infrastructure since the 1950s. Even though some of them date back to the mid-19th century, electricity networks, for instance, railway networks. Historians of technologies, such as Johann Schott, have focused on this, on measuring the role of engineers, for instance, in the creation of such a network through the establishments of technical organization. But more specifically, we can consider what good are infrastructure to be European research today. On the occasion of this anniversary, I would like to present the contribution of social scientists and historians of science and technology to the reflection on scientific infrastructure over the past 20 years, to understand social, epistemological, and environmental impact of such philosophy of integration. For infrastructure studies, as they are called, the infrastructure provides a privileged site of observation for describing and understanding scientific work, its organization, and its concrete task. Beyond the modest words of support, funding, tools commonly used today to talk about research infrastructure, an ambitious vision of scientific practices is revealed. Beyond the high objectives of science in an economy of knowledge oriented by competitiveness, the life of research infrastructure is extremely rich and telling. They materialize a relational dimension and make scientific ecologies visible. But let me start by the beginning, and the notion of infrastructure is certainly not new, since it appeared in the scientific vocabulary of engineers as well as in the philosophical lexicon of the 19th century. In English, the word did not enter the Oxford English Dictionary until 1927, but it is particularly present in the lexical field of economics, organization, and planning. From its industrial and mercantile origins, the concept pairs with a whole range of other concepts, such as that of commitment, convention, coordination, and scientific cooperation. The notion of infrastructure is not limited to science and technology, obviously, but it is a boundary object at the interface of the world of research and the worlds of policymakers. By placing so much emphasis on the collaborative and collective research, infrastructure challenges the conventional hagiographies of individual achievement, especially when that achievement is valued to the extent that it escaped its circumstance and context. For that reason, historians of science and technology often point out the paradox of infrastructure. Between invisibility and grandeur, and we'll come back on this issue, silence and risk. And by making visible what is scientific routine, infrastructure studies help to better understand the properties incorporated in the norms, practices, institutions that structure scientific research, but also to question the imaginary of the sublime and the grandeur of such equipment, or afterwards, sometimes a ruin that ran through them. But let's start by a little tour in the form of a narrative. I'm sorry, because I am a bit specialist of the scientific revolution, so I will come back on this habit. The emergence of the scientific revolution during the 17th century is used to be described as a revolution of organization. The invention of new places, such as the Academy of Science, experimental laboratory, botanical garden, anatomy theaters, was part of a process of institutionalization of scientific communities. Historians describe the cognitive leap represented by the formalization of practices, the mobilization of expertise by royal administration, which was based on the creation of common scientific ethos. By embodying scientific authority in places and equipment, the European sciences gave a concrete expression of the famous Baconian ideal of the House of Solomon that you can see here on this picture. The infrastructure were part of an absolute style of royal patronage rather than a functional logic. Therefore, these great facilities were linked to the establishment of new cognitive forms of scientific research, such as notes, laboratory notebooks, journals, reviews, that supported and informed the scientific methods. This point attention also to the prosthetic qualities of infrastructure in the sciences, instruments, apparatus, but also bureaucracy, all function as complement and extension of the human practitioner's body in the experimental culture. In her book, Too Much to Know, Anne Blair, historian of science, underlined the importance of setting up increasingly effective instruments to tame this new abundance of information or to safeguard an intellectual heritage. However, far from this cumulative imagination, his book does not hide also the tension at work in the early modernity. The encyclopedic ambition were challenged by the proponent of the scientific revolution, who wanted also to wipe out traditions and start from first principle. The absolutist repertory of infrastructure was thus far from being always fixed and efficient and also cumulative. Information always remained personalized and self-interested, attached to the credit of an institution or a person that produced it. This precarity, incompleteness, and reversibility are the hallmark of the classical science. As noted in the introduction, the term infrastructure was coined by railway engineers early 19th century. They were the ones who were responsible for the first Europeanization of technical system in Europe. They were associated with a new economy of promise that makes these infrastructure indicators of prosperity and efficiency. Engineers show a real face in the installation of the material structure that will regenerate the society. Here is a good example, Michel Chevalier, Saint-Simonian engineers who visited United States and make comparison between Europe and the new modern democracy. This was the moment of emergence of the great technical system of roads and electricity, which promised infinite modernization. The high value of science and technologies is reflected in the creation also of large facility with a monumental dimension, monumental architecture. Here you have a beautiful example of this monumentality. And the success of these undertakings is also due to the desire to establish common standards, such as in physics or in chemistry throughout Europe and the empires, but also relies on a form of scientific internationalism illustrated by scientific congresses and professional associations. So here you have different precursors of our big equipment. Finally, according to the historian of science, however, the word infrastructure tended to be eclipsed, and it was not until the 1960s and 1980s that the word re-emerged in a massive way in the state vocabulary, associated with the adjectives vital or critical, and vital infrastructure, critical infrastructure. It became a key concept in public policy, from state planning to government expertise. In the 2000s, infrastructure are discussed and negotiated, and are the subject to assessment and environmental impact studies. We are entering there in the risk society with the new principles which govern public action, the precautionary principle, the sustainable development. When infrastructure seems to be the icons of a triumphant and state-run technoscience, they are becoming also the living symbol of a new technical and scientific democracy. The shift from the solid to digital infrastructure underline both a dematerialization of the infrastructure issue, but is it certain? We don't know. But also renews the political and economic and geopolitical concerns. After this schematic narrative, we have to understand what infrastructure do to science. Infrastructure are not just tools and instruments to help the circulation or to enhance coordination of scientific activities. They inform, they perform science. To insist on their transformative capacity, I will distinguish several heuristic uses of infrastructure. If we try to characterize a relationship between infrastructure and the formation of an experimental culture from the Renaissance onwards, so a long time ago, we can see that the investment in new places, a general use of instrumentation, is based on a materialization of scientific thought that is more attentive to the gesture and condition necessary for experimental reproduction. So, superbly analyzed by Simon Scheffer, professor of history of science in Cambridge. In the making of early modern science, three stakes are interconnected. A power of depersonalization, first of all, which is one of the great achievements of experimental and observational practices. A power of universalization by making possible remote scientific action. A power of collective authority, because these facilities are increasingly the manifestation of the institutional logic of learned communities. In a recent book, Science in the Archives, the American historian of science, Lauren Daston, questioned the preeminent place of archives in scientific activity, mainly in genetics, in medicine, in climatology, or in geology. For instance, most of naturalist classification work of the 18th and 19th centuries were linked to new system of information infrastructure. Well analyzed in the case of Linnaeus or Humboldt, Alexander Humboldt, in the 19th century, these techniques underline the importance of tables, charts, but also furniture, notes that precedes the final publication. Similarly, drafts and lists are valuable indicators alongside indexes, so new technologies of information. Piles of papers, files, atlases play an essential role in the archiving of plant life, for instance. The scientific archive is not only seen as a warehouse, witnessing only a dynamic of accumulation and compulsive collecting, it is the active principle of vectorization of scientific progress. The influx of this scientific information is not without its problem and is fueling reflection on knowledge infrastructure. In the context of digitalization, the sociologist Suzanne, this is the herbarium of the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, obviously, and this is Suzanne Listar, one of these ethnographers of infrastructure. In the context of digitization, the sociologist Suzanne Listar has reconceptualized the notion of infrastructure to show that it encompasses both physical and material realities, such as a building, but also concepts that aim to organize and prioritize the flow of information, as well as to establish shared objects and standards. Behind scientific revolution, scientific networks, disciplines, we find each time an innovation in terms of infrastructure. The description used to associate infrastructure with the idea of stability. But this stability is not given in advance, but the result of a long process of interaction, circulation, and classification. Finally, more than ever, it remains important to understand scientific infrastructure in a wide context and to realize from this complex history what it means to create infrastructures in Europe. In this last section, it is important to return to this interplay of scale. First of all, it should be remembered that European scientists have always wanted to build a scientific community by pooling material and human resources. Consider the successes of the CERN, the European Space Agency, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. It is certain that in European history, infrastructure has played a driving role in Europeanization through science. Starting from an approach based on the differentiated development of these infrastructure networks, Europe is made an intellectual space to be invented and structured. For example, in the climatology, in the science of the climate during the 19th century, Deborah Cohen points out how much the pioneers of climate science in the Habsburg Empire placed the notion of scale at the heart of their analysis in order to better understand local atmospheric phenomena. What happened in a multinational composite monarchy like the Austrian-Hungarian Empire? Under the leadership of Julius Hahn in Vienna, a whole team of scientists was interested in the relationship of local winds and storms to the Earth's atmospheric circulation. The climatological infrastructure and the network of meteorological stations, for instance, have played an essential role in materializing this effort of unity beyond local particularities. Throughout the 19th century, the new expansion of Europe contributed to the projection of European science in the colonial peripheries. More broadly, it promoted the universalization of European model through scientific infrastructures. From agronomic station to jardin d'essai, botanic gardens, from observatory to the network of Pasteur Institute, until the decolonization in the middle of the 20th century, the colonies served as a testing ground for European scientists. The development of infrastructure was part of a plan for modernization and territorial conquest associated with the notion of development and forms of expertise emblematic of the colonial administration. Anthropologists have shown, for example, how research infrastructure in colonial Indonesia created both a progressive sense of modernity and a link with the Dutch culture through the use of metropolitan materials and architecture in their scientific infrastructure. In the case of post-imperial situation, the history of science has highlighted the importance of scientific ruins that radically question the stability and sustainability of infrastructure in these parts of the world. The question of obsolescence, decay, or disappearance of scientific infrastructure is raised in this context. Whether we are thinking of former colonial laboratory, abandoned sites, or damaged environment to be restructured. An excellent and provocative ethnographic collection on this issue has been published by Wenzel Geisler, Traces of the Future. Infrastructure are now careful to reverse, therefore, the triumphalist perspective of the past to emphasize also the breakdowns, the blackouts, the effect of pipeline policy that produces an isolationist conception of infrastructure. ESFRI's white paper in 2020 released with its strategic orientation evoking a healthy scientific ecosystem signal a complete change in the philosophy of the infrastructure. In the context of internationalization, of cooperation, and the ideal of open science, we must not forget the work involved in maintaining this infrastructure, but also with the environmental crisis, infrastructure studies point to the fragility and vulnerability of these social material interlockings. A new conceptualization privileging the word repair as key concept takes us out of a logic of innovation in a productivist framework, as illustrated by research on the extension of low-cost information technology infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa. Moreover, current work emphasizes the need to implement an ecology of scientific infrastructure with Europe as a model. The sociologist Jennifer Gabris from the University of Cambridge has insisted on the need to make this post-mortem trajectory of technologies visible in her book, Digital Rubbish, A Natural History of Electronics. She drew attention to the accumulation of electronic waste in the context of an ideal of dematerialization and virtualization. This observation leads us to reconsider our relationship with technology by introducing also an ethic of infrastructure of care that is sometimes absent from the traditional vision of new technologies. What about laboratory waste, obviously? Scientists have obviously taken up this issue by trying to promote green laboratory to reduce consumption and waste. In coining the concept of thrifty science, Simon Wherrett recalled the importance of a balance between expenditure and means could never be considered as infinite. This concern, this care, and this sense of cooperation on the long run are still, I believe, characterizing our distinctive way of doing science in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this passionate, very interesting historical overview of the origins of research infrastructures. But now I suggest that we have a look at the movie which we prepared in ESFRI to show in several minutes the key elements of the development of our ESFRI ecosystem, of our roadmaps. You will see different milestones very rapidly, but I think it will be very, very interesting for all of you, for all of us, to enjoy this video.
Progress of a healthy, interconnected ecosystem of research infrastructures we see as our contribution to the European research area development and in broader context to sustainable growth of our economies. System of research infrastructures that supports our societies, that is really the foundation of our well-being.
about the future of the European research area is that it acts as an integral instrument of recovery, cooperation, and transformation via science and innovation.
What I see for European infrastructure is that they continue to develop, helping other actors shape our European research efforts and the objectives of recovery in a green and digital Europe.
And in order to be able to achieve all of these ambitious goals, we need to connect all the actors, and all the actors need to switch in a higher gear to contribute to this.
I would like to wish all the best to Jana and formally hand over the chairmanship over ESFRI.
Let me first warmly welcome once again all the newcomers to the ESFRI family. What you're asked of is to look into your operations and see how you can increase your contribution. ESFRI is here to help you in this. We have a firm plan to increase our collaboration with the stakeholders, and we will help you deliver on the expectations of the policymakers.
Dear guests, after this passionate film about the 20 years of ESFRI, I am looking forward to the passionate discussion which will take place right now in the high-level speakers panel. I invite to the stage Jan Khrushchek, who will moderate this panel. Jan is our former ESFRI chair. Under his chairmanship, we published the last roadmap, ESFRI Roadmap 2021. Please, Jan, come to stage and invite all the speakers.
Thank you, Elena. Dear colleagues, before inviting to the stage the speakers, let me extend the thanks that were already expressed to the French Presidency and to the Academy for allowing us to assemble here for this meeting. Also to Elena Offert, who was really the soul beyond all the organizational work done. Elena, thank you very much. And now, without any ado, let me invite to the stage the four distinct speakers who are giving their personal views on the 20 years of ESFRI. So I'm inviting to the stage the Director General for Research and Innovation from the European Commission, Jana Paquet. Jana, please join us here. I'm also inviting a long supporter of ESFRI, a good friend, Barbara Weitgruber, Director General from the Austrian Ministry, and the two chairs which have been very instrumental for the development of the ESFRI's ideas and who will take the light further, Jana, Kolar, and Giorgio Rossi. Please, friends, come to the stage here. Let me start with Jean-Éric Paquet. Jean-Éric, over the years, ESFRI played, as you said in your introductory speech, an essential role in shaping the European research area. You mentioned that ESFRI has been a big achievement in implementing the European research area. And could you extend a little bit on the role of ESFRI documenting or presenting few more examples and maybe also some achievements which you see as fundamental ESFRI has contributed to the concept of the European area, and maybe even extending your views to the future, please.
Yeah, well, I am a big fan of ESFRI, as I think everybody knows, because ESFRI is showing how we can, in a very complex governance, 27 member states and many associated countries, together with this extraordinary variety of actors, how we can not just come together, but make real decisions together. And I think ESFRI is really the place in the European research area where we have seen the most concrete results happening. This is what I find so remarkable. I mean, I briefly explained or said earlier why I think this is possible, because we equipped ourselves with a regulatory framework, the ERIC regulation, much used, and ESFRI is promoting it. We have certainly resources at the EU level available to support roadmap implementation with past and present framework programs. I think this is not a small element. We have then human resources, of course, the chairs and your teams around yourselves, but then also the national delegates and the Commission administration. And this is a group of people which is deeply committed to the European research area or the European ambitions, which is to bring together the best science and for that generate, in many cases, the needed critical mass by combining networks of infrastructures or creating and upgrading new ones. And that was then, of course, very much also the success of, I think it was 6 or 7 chairs now in the meantime, or are you the 7th or the 8th, Jana? I think what you have done, and Giorgio, what you've done individually is, of course, also very much a source of pride for you. It must be, because you have, in all cases, been really at the heart of it. The roadmap idea is, I think, particularly powerful. And I know it is powerful because I know how political and challenging the discussions are each time to come to a conclusion on the roadmap, which means that the ESFRI Forum is not trying to make easy decisions, but it is effectively trying to work on the roadmap to make a difference for the infrastructures which are retained. And that means not retaining quite a few others, at least not immediately, and giving space, including organizing that space outside the roadmap for maturation to happen. So you've been quite demanding from that point of view. We have been quite demanding from that point of view as well. So I think it's a combination of all these elements which explains the 25 billion euros of investments carried out over time, which is not a small amount of funding. And I think a real source of inspiration, Barbara, for us as co-chairs of of the European Research Area Committee, and also the co-chairs of the European Research Area Forum, which has been set up by ministers now not long ago, and where we are in other areas of European science and research and innovation using that experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean-Eric. In particular, I thank you for highlighting the collaborative spirit in ESFRI, because I think this was really an essential element of success, and probably it's also a kind of role model for similar fora to be established, because we have put over the past years, and I'm also already remembering a lot of the ESFRI's history. We have really put a lot of emphasis on finding consensus rather than power playing and voting. So I think this spirit can be really a good example for further European integration and processes in different bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jan, maybe I can say one last thing, which is to say that the beauty in political terms of research infrastructures, at least the ones which we are working on, is that this can just not be done by one member state. Huh? I mean, you know the quip. Huh? You have small member states and member states which don't yet know that they are small. And therefore, this is really about really teaming up. And in infrastructure, you can touch it, that you need that. And that, I think, was, of course, the driver at the outset. And it's exactly the spirit which I think we need across all areas of science and research in Europe.
Thank you. Barbara, I mentioned that you are following ESFRI from the different perspective already for quite some time, and so your opinion on ESFRI is very, very valuable. Now, being a Director General at the Austrian Ministry, of course you see the European science policy from a broader perspective, but what do you think that has been the main success factors for ESFRI and for European science policy, and how do you see ESFRI working in the international perspective?
Yes, I've been around for a long time, actually, and have met many of the ESFRI chairs. I think I would like to start with people. It's always been dedicated people in the European Commission, in all participating states at the administrative level, but of course also the scientific community, really believing that this vision to have joint research infrastructure to enable cutting-edge research, attracting talent, can be made possible, and thereby also convincing finance ministries and those actually funding and having this long-term commitment. And of course also for the scientific community, being on the roadmap, when you started with the roadmaps and then of course the landmarks, seeing that you're able to do it, it's an important signal, making it also attractive for others to join. It's a sign of organizational maturity and scientific excellence, and really has an impact on national research and innovation systems. At least in Austria, I mean, we do have national 10-year strategies for research, innovation, and technology, but we also have action plans regarding research infrastructure, including, of course, European and international membership, and a pretty tough set of criteria where we start considering an Austrian membership, and then challenging also our own scientific community to get together and build consortia and really argue with that why they think Austria should be part of a certain infrastructure. And at the same time, we designed a national database where we have all research infrastructure publicly funded, open for collaboration, and this is good because it's a mapping. It also makes it more attractive internationally, and it's an instrument for our discussions with the ministries of finance for the refunding, of course, of the infrastructures, and that's valuable, of course.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you also for mentioning this national database of research infrastructures, because I have always admired Austria of having such a tool, which is very powerful in many terms, as you're saying, and probably this is an idea which we could follow also at the European scale, or it could be at least an inspiration for other countries to explore. It helps in better understanding, in better integrating the research infrastructure into the entire system, and then it makes, or it allows probably a smoother way when discussing with the other partners in the government, in particular with the finance ministries. Yes.
And it's also with the industry. We developed it jointly with the Ministry in charge of Economic Affairs and the Chamber of Commerce, because we have very many small and medium enterprises, and they would not know where research infrastructure is available. So it's over 2,000 actually by the time being, and 120 research performing organizations in Austria, being a small country.
Thank you very much. Giorgio, we went together a quite long path in ESFRI and in discussing research infrastructure policy. Therefore, I'm a little bit almost ashamed to ask you to give us a personal retrospective on the challenges we have been seeing together in the past in ESFRI. Could you just nonetheless comment a little bit on your memories on the challenges which we had to overcome when discussing the different policy issues in ESFRI?
Thank you, Jan. Well, let me say first that if we are celebrating 20 years of ESFRI with an overall very positive judgment of its function, is because ESFRI is a good formula. ESFRI is an informal forum with participation of national delegations from member states and associate countries. It has managed to influence investments of over 20 or 25 billion euros without having a single penny to invest directly. And this is, to me, the foundation of the success and of the prestige and of the trust that ESFRI has gained through the years. And the delegations are built with a strong representative of the scientific community and a strong representative of the governments, the ministries. So through the years and different proportions and different configurations, there is a high turnover of people, but still the trust from the scientific community has been strong, and the links with national policies has become stronger and stronger. So these are elements, structural elements of ESFRI that have worked out. Then when we started the blue period of the roadmaps, we invented a couple of things. We invented the landscape analysis as a central part of the roadmap. It was digested by ESFRI through long discussions, but it was so important because it brought together the whole landscape, the whole ensemble of European effort in research infrastructure, which is, it was and is still largely by national initiatives or some regional initiatives, and bringing on the same level of analysis helped a lot the national authorities, the Commission, to orient effectively the investment. Second invention was the landmarks. The landmarks, again, it was an invention that didn't blow up in a single day, but meant understanding, giving evidence that there are some long-term engagements for long-term beneficial undertakings that were somehow put in a high visibility situation, aside with the projects that had 3 years to come to the maturity level to be considered as a potential long-term engagement and long-term beneficial undertaking. In this, the Commission, on its role, has been, of course, pivotal because has created measures from the design studies to the preparatory phases in which, from the very beginning of the development of an infrastructure concept, a large community of member states and associate countries was engaged, giving both the intellectual contribution to shaping the project and preparing the national authorities to become eventually partners. So all of this has developed through the years, and things have been changing lately on important grounds. The pandemic has been a shock. The whole concept of research infrastructure and European science has been based on mobility of researchers for decades. Suddenly, mobility was zero for a couple of years. And there will be a long COVID effect on the mobility. Research infrastructure has demonstrated resilience to that for the time being. New kind of services, remote access was extended with the known technologies, but many research infrastructure started developing new technologies for interactive remote access, for having users being fully in charge of their access, although not being there. But this has consequences also in the organization of the infrastructure, because if the infrastructure has to deliver more and more remote services, needs a different proportion of permanent human resources at the infrastructure and technology investment to make all of these possible. Internationalization is another aspect. ESFRI has been an important science diplomacy object in the world. In the GSO, the ESFRI countries, that are the 4 members of G7, were effective in showing the model and raising curiosity, and very favorable curiosity by the other G7 plus 5 or 6 countries that participate. Let's keep in mind that this is one of the European products that is acknowledged worldwide in the scientific community. And now internationalization, of course, it's a challenge, and let's maintain the concept that science is one of the best grounds for diplomacy. And then maybe I stop here because, as usual, I speak a lot.
Thank you, Giorgio. I mean, it just illustrates how many issues we have been tackling over time and how we developed our thoughts. And I think it is really proper from time to time to take this step back and look backwards, because it really deserves some reflection. Now coming to the future, Jana, what do you see as the biggest challenges for research infrastructures ahead? What are, let's say, the most promising directions of development? How do you see this developing in the let's say short or medium term perspective?
Yes, thank you very much, Jan. Now, it's usually difficult to predict what the future will bring, especially when it comes to science. Now, so I will try to anticipate some things that I believe are important for the future and that we need to consider as the community that deals with research infrastructures. Now, first of all, it's clear that the challenges that we face will grow. And in addition to the ones that we know are ahead of us, huge ones, like, for example, climate and energy, there will be new ones that will surprise us. COVID was mentioned, and then such abrupt ones as war, for example. So it's very difficult to plan these things. What we need to, what I'm sure that we will need in the future is more science-based solutions. And these science-based solutions will need to increasingly incorporate different disciplines, build on the knowledge across sectors. And not just this, in addition to the knowledge across sectors, there will be more emphasis on the data, building on the big data and also scientific calculations that will support it. Now, just supporting scientific solutions alone is not enough. What is important, and it has been mentioned already in this panel, is also the ecosystem. Now, we have a diverse ecosystem that in Europe of various actors, research infrastructures just being one of them. And the success in the future very much depends on how well we will be able to integrate the various actors. For example, research infrastructures with the users and the providers of research infrastructures from the scientific community, universities, research performing organizations, technology organizations. Then there are many, for example, also technology infrastructures. There are many intermediary organizations that will then help us bring inventions closer to the business and finally launch them on the market. So what we would really need to build in the future, and that's responsibility of every actor in the system, is to connect the dots in order to have the efficient system which will enable us to bring the discoveries to the market. Because society needs the solutions, be it to societal challenges or the economic challenges that we will face. Now, ESFRI is well placed to help in this. Now, it is a well-established forum which works well, also with our immediate stakeholders, and it's based, and this also works very well with the Commission over the past 20 years, and it is important that there's the element of trust that has developed over the past 20 years in the way we work and how we reach agreements on how to move in the future, how to address further development of the research infrastructure system. Now, what we, the fact that we have ESFRI helps also build the ecosystem, because it's also important to have a phone number of a person that you can call and say, this, we need to connect. This is extremely important when you want to build the ecosystem. Now, in addition to the challenges related to the delivery of solutions that research infrastructure should support and the creation of this ecosystem, what is relevant for the research infrastructure system in the future. Sorry, I hope you've heard me so far. I'll just mention that the one challenge that is not going away, and although we have been working on it throughout the past 20 years, is sustainability of research infrastructures. Now, first of all, there's the funding. Now, in order to be able to continue, well, to deliver on this very ambitious investment agenda of 25 billion, it's important that we are able to demonstrate the impacts to society and to policymakers. And this is a huge responsibility. You know, this price tag comes with increased responsibility. And ESFRI will support these activities also within the next 2 years when we plan to deliver, let's say, a meta-analysis on impact assessments. And the next challenge on related to sustainability is the price tag also linked to the climate and energy challenge. Research infrastructures, at least several of them, use a lot of energy, and we need to do something to make it, to increase the carbon, to decrease the carbon footprint of research infrastructures. We all need to make it a priority. And another one that is increasingly becoming important is when we deal with big data, we need also support of scientific computing. This is increasingly tremendously over the years. This is also a very important contribution to this price tag when it comes to carbon footprint. So we need to pay attention increasingly more also to these two aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. You, in some sense, made a very nice bridge to a question I have prepared to all of the panelists, namely, ESFRI and the first prerequisite when starting discussions on research infrastructures, we are always starting with scientific excellence, with the excellence of the idea that stands beyond the research infrastructure. On the other hand, we as you rightly highlighted, are also discussing the impact of the research infrastructure, the value of the research infrastructure for broader societies. And this is in principle a challenge to accommodate, let's say, the scientific excellence, the excellent service to the scientific communities, to facilitate these breakthrough discoveries, and at the same time to come up with some real-life applications that potentially and eventually come from the policy perspective. So the question to all the panelists is, what do you see how we can manage to operate with this dual challenge the infrastructures are faced with, and what can ESFRI do, what can we do as member states in order to facilitate the process? And probably I would start with the political, in apostrophs, part of the panel and ask Barbara and Jan and Eric to kick off, and then maybe the two ESFRI colleagues try to continue in discussing these issues. Barbara, please.
Thank you. Well, I think the focus on scientific excellence and high quality also regarding the services is the prerequisite of any kind of impact, be it societal or economic. And the COVID-19 pandemic has clearly shown that you need this long-term investment and you need excellent frontier research in order to then be able to quickly develop the vaccines. And the importance of state-of-the-art research infrastructure and the impact and the quick solutions that were possible were also seen because all ERICs, all ESFRI infrastructures immediately joined the efforts, not just on the European but international level, to really support development of vaccine and therapeutics. But also the state-of-the-art digital infrastructures and technologies based on European values. I think this is the second part that became quite evident over the past few years. And I think this is an additional asset, actually, of Europe when we talk about artificial intelligence and the application of artificial intelligence. And one element which is important, especially when it comes to social sciences and humanities, but also life sciences and the environment, is the importance of geographical coverage. Because we have distributed infrastructures, we need as many countries participating as possible to have the database, to have these nodes all interconnected. So it's not just actually about widening, but it's about having valid data and really have the best possible joint effort in order to be even more competitive on the European level.
Thank you. Jean-Eric, please.
Well, I would say that we continue to need cutting-edge, curiosity-driven science and research infrastructure, so don't lose that from sight, would be my first point. That remains, I think, really at the heart of the work which is ongoing. But it's also true and essential in the ongoing work on the European research area that science, research and innovation is very much indeed about providing knowledge and solutions to the transitions we are confronted with. The twin transition in the European context is really the direction which ministers and public administrations are setting to the European research area, make a difference in our digital transformation and allow us to deal with the urgency of our green transformation. So that applies obviously also to research infrastructure. So you need to be part of that effort. So that's as far as research infrastructure's work and the ESFRI work is concerned. I mean, one illustration of that is that as you work on the landscape, on the mapping, I think you should look beyond individual infrastructures or groups of infrastructures, which you are doing so well, and you need to look at what type of services are delivered by these infrastructures in that political science-based direction, green and digital, and there are certainly also a number of additional key objectives. These are the two central non-exclusive ones, and see how you can cluster, or you as research infrastructures cluster yourself, promoted strategically by ESFRI. And the second point is the other way around, and I said it briefly in my welcoming address a moment ago, is that you need as research infrastructures to see you as full actors of the European research area. So you need to see yourself as relevant in discussions which set the agenda. And of course we need to ensure that we give you space for that as well in the Era Forum for Transition, for example, maybe also in ERAC, and this being at European and also at national level. You are absolutely key actors. You're not just science providers, you are science policymakers. See yourself like that.
Thank you. Giorgio, you would like to contribute to that as well?
Yes. Interoperability is a key word. It's not a technicality for research infrastructure. It's a program. It's a program that impacts both research and innovation. Interoperability means that as it has been analyzed first in the Roadmap 2018, a given research infrastructure classified in a domain is actually having impact in nearby and sometimes far away research domains, because it provides knowledge that is useful for them and can be therefore interoperable with other research performing laboratories, organizations, infrastructures. Industry must come, industry to mean applications, can be civil services, of course, not only private industry, should be able to perceive the research infrastructure system as an effective potential provider of new knowledge. And this can be done for mission-oriented research, so it doesn't come from the users, it comes top-down from political vision, from the Commission or from the member states, or from industrial needs. The infrastructures, if they are interoperable, they can provide the part of the new knowledge to be provided naturally, not forcing an unnatural organization or attitude by the researchers who actually produce the new knowledge. This is an effort. It doesn't come automatically. It has come first, the concept, from the data. The European Open Science Cloud wants to have fair data, where the I means interoperable. And this is good. And this is something we are trying to build. And research infrastructure have a very big responsibility in populating the EOSC with high quality data. The biggest risk of EOSC is to become polluted with low quality data. And the research infrastructures are at the best position to start populating good data into the EOSC. But interoperability of data is one thing. It's interoperability of data that have been produced, and most of the time have been produced based on curiosity-driven research, not based on mission-driven or based on industrial needs. So it is the interoperability of the production level of the new knowledge, so interoperability of the research infrastructure that we must learn how to implement effectively. And at that point, I think we will have fulfilled in a natural way, without forcing the scientist to do something that the scientist doesn't like to do because he likes to do fundamental research. But the scientist can be very much rewarded in understanding that he has done his piece that goes towards a mission, towards solving a practical societal problem, towards solving a competitiveness, even economic competitiveness, why not, problem of Europe.
Thank you, Giorgio. I very much resonate with you, which is not surprising because we are coming from the same direction. But let me mention here something which was already said in the introductory lecture, and this is the concept of an integrated research infrastructure ecosystem that interconnects many dimensions, also in policy making, in sectorial agendas, in the European strategies. And I think this is a concept that we shall further elaborate on because it has some possibilities for bringing us forward and maybe even a bit closer to our targets. Now I'm going back to Jana, the same question as for the others stand for you, but I would like to give it a bit more personal touch because you will be leading ESFRI at least for the next 2 years. So could you add also something from this perspective, because many people here in the audience certainly would like to know in which directions you would like to prioritize and steer ESFRI to develop.
Thank you. So if this is the question about cutting-edge research versus provision of solutions to societal challenges closer to the market, I will always emphasize the value of fundamental research because it needs to be emphasized. It's difficult to convince the public and policymakers that investments need to be done into something that does not produce very, let's say, immediately impactful results. So we need to consider whenever we discuss research infrastructure, which come with a big price tag, especially the ones that deal with fundamental research, that this research is relevant and produces solutions to our problems, societal challenges. It just takes a little bit longer. Now, for example, if you look at the discovery of radio waves in 1880, well, that resulted in telegraph and all our communication, well, most of our communication technologies now are based on that. So when gravitational waves were discovered in 2016, and the Nobel Prize was allocated to it in 2017, it was all over the media, but no one really understood what it meant. So the articles in the paper rose, so what does it mean to me? And at that time, I wrote an article for our broadsheet newspaper saying, so we have them, what does it mean to me? Now, of course, it takes some time to reap the results of such an invention and bring it to the market. Now, what we know nowadays, only a few years after the discovery, is that we can see things that we otherwise cannot see using gravitational waves. And of course, they link to research infrastructure. That's where they were discovered, at LIGO Observatory. That's why I bring this example up. Now, so we can see black holes, for example, using gravitational waves. But there are also some papers coming out that they can also be used, for example, for communication. And this is only a few years later. So I really think that we should emphasize and cherish investments, although very expensive, in fundamental science. This needs to be emphasized because whenever we have challenges, we face big societal or economic challenges, which is the case also now. We tend to move towards solutions which can be delivered to the market and immediately. And we need to stress the role of fundamental research. Now, having said that, at ESFRI, we have a variety of infrastructures. We have the one that focus on cutting-edge research, which will deliver impacts in decades or 2 decades. We can't foresee. And we have research infrastructures, especially the distributed ones, which address societal challenges, which are also contributing to cutting-edge research, but also have very strong emphasis, contribution to the development of solutions to societal challenges. And it's very important that with research infrastructures support all of these infrastructures, because they are needed by researchers, and it's our task to provide tools that enable scientific discoveries across the fields.
Thank you, Jana, for these very, very clear words. And maybe now a kind of complementary questions to your fellow panelists. I mean, from the different perspectives you're representing, from the European Commission, from the national perspective, or Giorgio, if I still may call you a scientist, because I'm sure you still are very active in science, from the scientific perspective, what would be the messages you would like to pass to Jana as a new chair? What would be the accents you would like to set for her next mission? Maybe starting with Jan-Erik this time.
No, thank you. Maybe before I reply to your question, just to come back to what Jana was saying, we indeed need to make the case to policymakers and finance ministers of the value of investing into fundamental research. And collectively, we have the best example ever at hand, so let's use it. It's the Covet Vaccine, which is a European vaccine developed by BioNTech, which is a European company, well, which admittedly teamed up with a US company, but that was for clinical trials and production in the US. The science behind the vaccine is 100% European, and it was developed by BioNTech under fundamental research funding, European Research Council included. And it so happens that this was repurposed, so to speak, overnight, because we had the genome largely carried also by the European Virus Archive, a European infrastructure, and then, of course, a very broad collective global effort facilitated by EMBL and the Covet platform funded with Horizon 2020, where here again, Europe's fundamental research infrastructure was absolutely decisive. And that is something which no one knows. So let's tell that story. It demonstrates the value of continued investment in curiosity-driven and fundamental research. Now, Jana, what I expect from you as a new chair, that was a question I think from Jan, is of course and I know you are already, and you will bring ESFRI to the next level in the context of the momentum of the European research area. And there's so much which has been said in the panel which you are taking with you, and I don't need to repeat it. So I'm going to just make 2 comments. The first one is what you did yesterday, what we did together yesterday, which was to open the ESFRI Stakeholder Forum, is going to be absolutely a key development. Not that you are not working with your clients and your stakeholders, but collectively and strategically we were not doing it yet, and that I think will allow indeed to cover many of the dimensions of the qualitative leap which we are preparing, or which you are doing already in ESFRI. So that's my first recommendation. And the second one, you said it yourself, and in principle I should have said it the first, but I didn't. You caught me on that, is sustainability. I mean, European research infrastructures need to become sustainable and climate neutral. I mean, there's just no way around it. And in some cases, you will tell me that seen from today, this is impossible. And maybe you are right, I can't judge. But we have the high-performing computer in the north of Finland. I couldn't now locate it, but maybe one of you is here who could give me the exact geographical location. And it is one which is, of course, has the benefit of hydro power, but it is also a climate negative research infrastructure, because the heat produced by the high-performance computer is going straight into the heating district of the city adjacent to the infrastructure. So this is, of course, an extreme best case, but I think it is impossible for us to argue for Europe being climate neutral by 2050, but more important, Europe to have reduced its emissions by 2030 by 55% and not act on that. So I think this is understood, I know. I don't think it is sufficiently acted upon, so I'm sure ESFRI can help on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Eric. I think ESFRI will take this challenge up, and I'm quite sure that Jana will be rather instructive in that process. Barbara, looking from the national perspective, what is your reflection on the needs you would see ESFRI addressing?
Well, I think it definitely has to continue the way it does with this guidance and the way it has been developed with the landmarks and the roadmaps and the criteria which keep being developed. At the same time, there's also the discussion, of course, of not just sustainability of the infrastructures, but also sustainability of funding, because there is still a lot of project funding which makes a stable development of some of the infrastructures challenging. So I think smart models of financing, which are mixed, need to further develop. And of course, the impact and mission orientation, which is one of the key elements of the new European research area, will definitely have an impact on ESFRI's work as well, and on the individual research infrastructures, and that, of course, depends on the kind of infrastructure, but it's an underlying issue which needs to be taken into account. And the geographical coverage, which I mentioned before, will be key to success in building a strong European research area, being also attractive, and of course infrastructures are also very, very important to attract talent from across the world. And we all know that the more transparent and the more open we are, the easier it will be to also have the talent across Europe. And actually, I would just like to end by thanking everyone here and everyone in all the different infrastructures and national administrations and funding agencies for having done the work that was done for 20 years and will hopefully be done in the next 10 years, because that's the period we are talking about in the new European research area. And it's good that, thank you to the French Presidency, having a physical conference really celebrating. This has not happened quite often in the past 2 years, and I think it's very good that it's being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And now, finally, Giorgio, with the burden of representing all the scientists in all the scientific disciplines, what is your position and advice?
So,
Jana?
my encouragement is to deepen and extend the landscape analysis, reaching out to elements of sustainability that are built into this system. And let me formulate this concept of dual usage of the research performing organizations of Europe. Several of them, who are producers of basic science or science according to their constituency, do also participate to to deliver research infrastructure services. And there is a special quality of having groups who are directly engaged institutionally in their own excellent science that decide to deliver a sizable part of their activity in delivering open access services. And this is, I think, a dimension that was somehow encouraged by the integration action programs of the Commission, but that has taken its own dynamics more recently, and is a complementary actor with some specific characteristics that may further link the scientists acting institutionally for their own science career, let's say like that, but that find interesting, rewarding, and possible also to be set into a long-term program of delivering science services for the general scientific community. So this is something that perhaps you could try to focus better, and it could be a role of ESFRI to do that. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, our time is almost over, but I still would like to give 1 or 2 minutes for reflections on points which we have not been tackling upon in the discussion. So everybody from the panel is invited for a final remark before I close this session. Maybe starting with Jana, because you have got a lot of ideas for the next years to come.
Yes, thank you very much for these very inspiring ideas. They also reflect the fact that we worked together so well over 20 years, because, well, not surprisingly, the challenges that you mentioned are in our work plan, which was discussed yesterday. Several of these, including, for example, strategic landscape analysis, are included in Action 8 of the New Era policy agenda. So we're well aligned on the way ahead. In addition to the actions on the ERA policy agenda, we have yesterday discussed also a few more, 2 days ago at the ESFRI meeting. Also a few more which we want to deliver on within the next 2 years, which will particularly address the actions that you have mentioned, several of them. I cannot go in details, but that's on my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reflection before I close? Jean-Eric, Barbara?
Just 4 words: open science and bon anniversaire.
Thank you. Barbara, you can be a bit more extensive than Jean-Eric, but our timer shows 0-0.
Well, actually, not as short, but pretty short. As you mentioned, the ERA policy agenda, they are all integrated. I mean, all the different actions will only work if each one of them is implemented in the best possible way. And I'm very glad to hear that, of course, a lot of it will be reflected in the work program, because it's not just about research infrastructure. It reflects back to what we are doing on research assessment and careers and talent and open science. And that's why it's so important that the European Research Area family is actually present in all these different actions. And thank you, and happy birthday.
Okay, colleagues, this was the final word from this panel. Let's thank all the panelists for the contentful discussion. And I am handing